Welcome to the Business Buyer Diaries. My name is Nathan Platter. I'm a full-time employee, and I bought a business. I did everything right, from finding the deal, handling all the due diligence on 63 opportunities, and ultimately bought a profitable gym. And boy, was I in for a big surprise as a new owner. I chronicled everything in real time, including the biggest wins to the stressful nights at 2 a.m. I'm sharing my journey without sugarcoating anything, so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. Here's today's episode. So this topic might be a little controversial based on the route I'm intending to go. But anyhow, one of the items I mentioned was for this franchise, the wording they have it is the owner of the studio, not a gym, but the studio is solely responsible for managing day-to-day operations. However, in lieu of them being on site, they can hire as up to like 3 managers or however many to be present for them and run the day-to-day operations. So at all times, there has to be someone fully staffed that has gone through certain manager training set up by this franchisor, the parent company. And so the current situation, the owner is selling a couple clubs. With this first club that I'm buying, the owner and their studio manager are trading off who runs the day-to-day hours. And that's fine. That's pretty normal for a smaller operation. But since I'm still going to be finishing up with some personal life commitments, I'm going to be leaning on having a manager there, ideally too, and they don't have to. And the seller doesn't want to be doing those hours anymore. And so I'm going to have to find a second manager to work with that first manager. And so yesterday we had a call with the sellers, the broker, and myself, and that was one of the topics. There are a few things we're ironing out on the transaction, the purchase agreement, transfer fees, but that was one area that I wanted to raise up. If they've thought about it, hopefully they have, and they offered to involve me in the hiring cycle for the club manager. Now, this brand has a very avid following. Usually they hire members as an instructor, and then an instructor gets promoted to a club manager. So it's a very internal, very rare to hire an external person from from a Lifetime Fitness or some other major brand to run the club. So it's very much an internal funnel upward model. And that's really cool. And so the current seller said, they can do it. They're going through the interview phase. They're happy to run it, or they can have me run it after I make the acquisition, but I have to do my own training before I can run the store and pass that requirement, or they can involve me as they run it and then the GM and I onboard at the same time. And I said, I like to be involved. I like to have a hand in that candidate selection, a hand in the interview process, and a hand in the final hiring decision. And that seems wise. That seems prudent. And as I was thinking about it, that it's controversial. It's a little hard to say out loud, but my goal is to have these clubs running themselves. They're a system that I oversee, and I inject myself in the day-to-day life and the vibrancy of the community, but I don't want to be the bottleneck for the day-to-day operations. And since they hire people internally, and this person's owned many studios, they've hired at least 10 managers before. They've hired at least 50 or 100 instructors. I don't know how many. I'm just going to throw out 50 or more instructors in their life. And they have prior experience in other industries. So they've hired and fired managers, directors, frontline workers. Like, they know what they're doing with these clubs. Like, they have pretty standard turnover. It's not like this is a shock. As crazy as it is, I am actually adjusting. I said I'd like to be involved in the selection, the hiring, and the interview cycle. I'm actually going to back off, and I'm telling the broker, I'd like the current owner to run full speed like they normally would with their normal hiring phase, and not necessarily involve me if I would slow down the process. If they have a Zoom call or they have an interview and I'm available, cool, I'll sit in on it, but I'm not going to make that a requirement. I know this is going to be a GM that I'm going to be responsible for. I know that they're going to be my liability if they're a bad fit and I'm going to have to find an alternative. But at this moment, that's an ego thing. It's not even my club yet. We haven't signed a PA yet. And it's not my circus, not my monkeys is the phrase. And so as crazy as it is, I'm giving the go-ahead for the seller to proceed as if they're going to keep operating the business and it's going to be theirs. Because, that's a real possibility. This whole thing could still fall apart. And so I'm going to trust the seller's judgment. I'm going to trust the broker as well. And if the seller decides to make a bad decision, the seller could hire some bum off the street and screw me over. That's totally a possibility. But I could also back out of the deal, and now they're stuck with a bum manager. Right? So it's a two-way street. There's a lot of like trust back and forth. And so that's kind of stretching me a little bit. But I also know that part of this deal, there is some seller financing. And so the seller is going to have a little bit of residue on this deal for a couple of years. And so they're banking on me to be a successful owner and for me to treat this like my baby, like they've treated it like their baby. So they're not just walking away clean slate, which is kind of good for me as well. So I didn't realize how much trust there would be between the seller and buyer. It's kind of stretching me. I feel like I'm dating some dude. and it's weird because like it's two owners, it's two dudes. It's kind of weird because we're having to do all this trust, but it's this big relationship, and it's a lot more personal and a lot more like I'm having to do a lot more like self-reflection on like, do I trust this person, not just this business, but like these owners to like make good decisions that'll benefit me, benefit them. But yeah, it's really fascinating. So that's where we're at now. That's where we're translating onto the broker. As of right now, we're 5 weeks away from the initial target closing date. It'll probably be kicked out. So instead of 5 weeks, we'll probably close in like 7-8 weeks or so. By the time this podcast comes out, it'll be months after everything is done. But that's the whole thing today. Trusting hiring decisions and knowing the right cadence for everything. So I'm going to let the expert continue being an expert. And after acquisition, I'll probably, in our consulting hours that I'll be paying him for, ask him how he found applicants, how he interviewed, how he hired, and take the good and take the bad and hopefully keep just the good. So that's where we're at. And we'll update when there is an update. This has been another episode of the Business Buyer Diaries. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I hope you're realizing that business ownership is no cakewalk. Check the podcast notes for a link to the DIY due diligence program, the complete list of show sponsors, and for media inquiries. Music written and composed by Wes Schrock. I'm your host, Nathan Platter. Join me again on the next one.